Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Israel Matters. Once again, I'm Rabbi Pesach Walicki, and with me, as always, is my dear friend, Elliot Chodov. How are you, Elliot?
I'm good, Pesach. How are you?
Good, good. You know, it's winter time, and I know that our Christian friends are all getting ready for the Christmas season.
And
It's
I'm
and
I'm getting over a
2020.
flu. I'm getting over a flu shot, and I've got a corona shot waiting for me in 2 weeks.
All right. So that's great news. You're going to be able to be free and get on the road again.
That's it.
And yeah, I'm a couple months down the road with that, so that's excellent news. But we're getting ready to end 2020, which is, I think, something that a lot of people have been ready for quite some time.
I
Uh,
saw a great I saw a great one online the other day. Uh, when 2020 becomes 21, we'll be old enough to drink.
well, in Israel, the drinking age is younger than that.
Indeed.
So I just wanted to share a thought. I've been writing a book. I mean, it's nowhere near done yet, so I don't want our viewers to get all excited and asking where they can buy it. But I've been writing some biblical commentary, going through verses and picking them apart. Those of you who've read my stuff, who've read my first book, A Cup of Salvation, on the Hallel Psalms, I really dig into the Hebrew and pull out different lessons from nuances in the Hebrew that are not evident in the English. And I was writing about the priestly blessing last week, and I noticed something very interesting. In the third verse of the priestly blessing, it says, the third verse, the final verse of it is, the Lord shall, everyone translates it as turn his face to you. But the literal Hebrew is yisa, that the Lord shall lift up his face to you. And none of the translations say that, even though to anyone who knows Hebrew, that's literally what it means, to raise
Yes.
up his face to you. And I think the translators don't want to translate it that way because it sounds a little strange, for like God's lifting up his face to us. So I looked up everywhere in the Bible that somebody lifts up their face to someone else or to something. And it actually does not appear that many times. And every time it appears, I mean, there's a couple places where it's just a literal description of physically someone like looking up, like in the Book of Kings, someone looks up at a window. So that's just, that's not being used figuratively. But every single time it's being used figuratively, it is somebody looking up to someone, not always to God, but to someone else who who can provide something for them, either to God in prayer or someone looking to a king to ask for something. So it actually is a subordinate looking up to someone in a kind of beseeching, requesting manner. And then that seems very, very strange to say that about God. And this is the only time that that verb is used for God, that imagery of God raising his face. And I would actually like to suggest, based on that, that there's a very powerful lesson, and Jewishly, this is a very strong strain in our theology, that at the end of the priestly blessing, God is basically saying to us, I need you to do your part. I need you to participate in this. That to bring peace, which is the end of the blessing, the Lord will raise his face to you and grant you peace. That in order to bring peace to the world, God has made us his partners. He's empowered us. He's given us free will, and he's given us, and it's a great gift, but it's a great responsibility. He's given us the ability to be the ones who build his kingdom, who do the work here on earth. And perhaps what is being said in this blessing is that that is a blessing. God is blessing us, but at the same time, he is turning to us and saying, I need you. I need you to do your part. And that's perhaps what is being implied by this strange verb, strange choice of words here. The syntax could have been different. If it was just God turning his face towards us, there are better words in biblical Hebrew for
Yes.
that. So I just thought that this might be a nuance kind of poetically to the priestly blessing. All right, there's
I,
my biblical
I,
thought for the day.
I like it. I think it meshes well, maybe for another discussion. The idea that mitzvah, commandment, comes on the one hand from the Hebrew tzivui, which is to command, but also from the same root as tzavta, together.
Right,
That
exactly.
that
Bonding.
that that is a bonding with God, and that it elevates us, but God is elevated through it as well.
Yeah, and he's allowed that. He's given us, he could do everything himself. He could build his kingdom. God can reveal himself to the whole world in a snap. He could split the Red Sea again and do that. But God has chosen to empower us and give us a role and essentially take a step back and say, okay, I need you to do your part.
Now you do your part, right?
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's get on to political things. Now, we've been talking about Iran and about Lebanon and that whole thing for a lot of weeks, but there's been some news related to the fact that there is a what looks a likely administration change going on in the United States. And there's more than a rumor. There's really a kind of strong rumor being floated that Joe Biden will be appointing a man by the name of Dennis Ross as the ambassador to Israel. And to Israel watchers who have been around for a while, who remember, back to the Clinton administration and the Bush and the second Bush administration, will remember that name. So I wanted to throw it out to you, and maybe you could give us some background, remind people or educate us. Who is Dennis Ross? What does this possibly signal? And how to interpret this.
Okay, let me actually start with an anniversary. We are on the anniversary date of the passing of Security Council Resolution 2334 under the last days of the Obama administration.
Oh, that was that resolution that that basically Obama, it was interpreted as a kind of stab in the back to Israel.
Yeah, stab in the back, slap in the face, all at once.
If I remember, it was kind of precedent setting.
It was usually precedent setting. First of all, the U.S. abstained, which allowed it to pass, which was also it was its own sort of gestalt, that on the one hand, the American administration was behind the wording of it, but when push came to shove, it didn't vote yes. It just didn't vote no, which permitted it to pass. And it had many ramifications, but I'm only going to mention one because it's always best to stay on firm ground, although I know how to navigate shaky ground. 2334, which America supported in the sort of omission rather than commission, defined the Western Wall as occupied Palestinian territory.
I remember that.
So let's leave settlement for a moment and occupation for a moment. I'm using all these terms with quotes around them, okay? Let's leave all of that aside for a moment. The Western Wall, not the holiest site, but the holiest site that Jews traditionally go to in Jewish history, is defined by this resolution as Muslim and occupied Palestinian territory. And that's what the Obama administration did as its sort of parting shot to Israel. Now, I mention it not only because of the anniversary, although it's worth mentioning, but we talk about Dennis Ross. I want to make a distinction between things that are fundamentally anti-Israel, as was Resolution 2334, and things that are not fundamentally anti-Israel, but that can harm Israel because of all sorts of reasons having nothing to do with animosity. And here I want to go into it in two different ways before I get to Ross in particular.
Do you mean like when a policy will get pushed on Israel under the guise of benefiting Israel, but really it doesn't? That kind of thing.
Yes. And I'll give you the what I think is the classic example of it, and he admitted to it afterwards, was Henry Kissinger's behavior during the opening days of the Yom Kippur War. Kissinger at the time, Secretary of State, but also close advisor to Richard Nixon, basically said, let the Israelis bleed a little bit, because he believed that that would reestablish Arab honor and allow them to enter into negotiations and ultimately make peace with Israel. That was Kissinger's view of the world. Now, Kissinger was unequivocally pro-Israel. And by the way, the source on that is no less than Daniel Patrick Moynihan in his book that he wrote about the administration. And I won't go into the details, but I think Moynihan is a good source. He said all that interested Kissinger was Israel. So what Kissinger did at the beginning of the Yom Kippur War was not to harm Israel in the long run. It was a Kissingerian sort of construct of how he could make the world operate according to Kissinger theory. And of course, it was wrong. Hundreds, if not more, of Israelis were killed as a result of it. Israel was on the brink of defeat. Nixon, who was a much simpler, and this is not about intelligent or stupid, but he was a much simpler character than Kissinger, basically said enough is enough. We got to send them the equipment, send them the resupply. And he's the one who essentially made the moves to save Israel. When Kissinger was no longer Secretary of State after he finished his position, he was interviewed by the New York Times. And one of the questions he was asked in the interview was, would America intentionally harm Israel? And his answer, which was very Kissinger, and I always believed was a sort of personal al chet, as we say on Yom Kippur, for the sins I have committed. He said, America would never intentionally harm Israel. On that, I think he was wrong. But he said, but America can make decisions that are in error that Israel can't afford. And I believe he was speaking about his own decisions. But it wasn't out of malice, it was out of miscalculation. Hubris, call it whatever you want, but it wasn't because he wanted to harm Israel. He did it because he wanted to help Israel, and the result was nearly an Israeli defeat and the destruction of Israel. Hold that thought for a moment. I want to add one more point before I get back to Ross. Ross has made many mistakes, and mistakes in and of themselves are not necessarily an indictment. And here I want to bring another character into play to quote, and that's James Mattis, a man who I hold in rather high regard. You don't get 4 stars in the Marine Corps by being either a failure or an idiot. And in his book, Mattis makes a point of saying, every time I made a mistake, they promoted me. And his point, and I think is an important point before we get to Ross, is that if we have a saying in Tzahal, the only people that don't make mistakes are the people that don't do anything. Right? So making a mistake in and of itself is not wrong, but making the same mistake twice is a whole different story. All right, the idea is you learn from your mistakes, and that's what sort of makes you better at the next level. Now let's come back to Dennis Ross. First of all, Dennis Ross comes from both a history and a philosophy that have cost Israel heavily over the years. Ross was in the State Department. He was a major player in the State Department back in the days of Bush Sr., when Secretary of State was a fellow by the name of James Baker. Now, Baker notoriously said in a meeting, and I won't quote him exactly because it's inappropriate for our
I know what you're talking about, yeah.
But he said, F the Jews, they didn't vote for us. That was the State Department that Ross cut his teeth in, basically.
And Ross is Jewish.
Yes, Ross is Jewish, and he's used that over the years as his calling card of, hey, I can't be anti-Israel, I'm Jewish. Torquemada was Jewish II, if I remember correctly. The Grand Inquisitor. Although I don't think he ever played that card. Ross comes from a philosophy that essentially argues that the strong side must make concessions to the weak side. Israel is viewed as the strong side. Israel is viewed as the side that needs to be more forthcoming because of its strength. And as a result, all of America's policies that Ross has supported, and that's under Clinton and under Obama, have been to pressure Israel to be able to come to terms with the Palestinians. Now, it failed under Clinton. It failed in the aftermath of Oslo. Ross was one of the great whitewashers of Arafat and Palestinian violations of the early stages of the Oslo Accords.
What was his role in the Clinton administration?
He was in the State Department, and ultimately he was a special emissary to the Middle East, to the negotiations. He was their go-to guy. He was also at Camp David. He wrote a book after Camp David, I'm talking about Camp David 2000, with Barak and Arafat, called The Missing Piece. And one of the interesting things about Ross is that he admits major errors in decision-making under Clinton and after, including under Obama vis-a-vis Iran, when, if you remember the days of the uprisings against the Iranian leadership under Obama, when many of us were trying to pressure the Obama administration to come strongly behind the uprising as it was. Yeah. Now, I don't want to say that it would have worked. I'm talking about right and wrong decisions, not necessarily. I don't want to play what if games. And his advisors, including Ross, told him, no, if you support the opposition, it will give the regime an excuse to crack down on the opposition. Well, guess what? The Iranian leadership doesn't need an excuse to crack down on opposition. And in the aftermath, he admitted that that was a mistake. He admitted that soft soaping Arafat was a mistake. At Camp David, and he wrote a book after Camp David called The Missing Piece, he basically admitted that they completely misread Arafat. Every time Arafat agreed to something but stopped, they offered him a little bit more. And he moved a little bit further but stopped. So they offered a little bit more, and he moved a little forward but stopped. In other words, he would never close the agreement. I'll give you, the football analogy is half the distance to the goal when you're inside the 10-yard line. And they never understood that he was not going to accept anything, but all he wanted was them to keep offering more. Now, I have to tell you, as an aside, I'm an honored graduate of the Don Vito Corleone School of Negotiating. I believe that when you make an offer and it's turned down, the next offer you make should be less than the one that was turned down.
Right.
If you keep offering more, then basically they have no incentive.
You've incentivized them to turn down the offer.
Of course.
If you offer less, yeah.
Right? I mean, this isn't exactly rocket science.
Yeah.
And every time they offered more, he agreed to part and said, no, make me a better offer. So this is sort of the Dennis Ross philosophy. Now, it was also based on the idea that Israel needs to be pressured to make concessions, because Israel doesn't want to make concessions without getting anything in return. And this is all part of the same sort of package idea. I want to give you sort of two background points on this. One is the fact that historically, winners don't negotiate with losers. In other words, the Ross school of thought runs counter to all conflict diplomatic history. When you win, you either tell the loser to take a hike or you dictate terms to them. The fact that Israel is willing to negotiate with the Palestinians is in and of itself a concession. Second, just a personal anecdote. A number of years ago, I was invited to speak at Grinnell College in Iowa, a lovely liberal arts, liberal college. And to make a long story short, we were at dinner before my talk, and a professor of peace studies and sociology started challenging me on the fact that Israel wasn't being forthcoming enough with the Palestinians. And I said, but we offered them basically everything, and they turned it down. And he said, well, that's because they're disempowered. Now, I'm old school. I don't understand this postmodern stuff. I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, they have no power, therefore they can't accept the offer. I said, well, okay, what do you recommend? He said, you have to empower them. You have to make them powerful enough to accept the offer. And I said, okay, let me see if I understand what you're saying. I need to give people who state openly that they want to kill me the power to kill me, and then they will accept my offer for peace. And his answer was, yes, exactly correct.
Okay.
My answer to him was, who's your drug dealer? Because you're getting some really good stuff. And I want to get in on this. Okay. But this is the liberal, and when I say liberal, I'm talking about liberal in the international relations theoretical school, not the conservative liberal political school, way of thinking that conflict and violence is really a result of misunderstanding. It's a result of not being able to share what can be shared between everyone, because everyone really wants peace, love, and understanding, and for their children to grow up in a better world. This is where Ross comes from. That is an extremely dangerous position in the Middle East. So that's essentially what we're looking at here.
So if Biden is talking about a guy like Dennis Ross, now whether it's Dennis Ross or not Dennis Ross in the end, if this is the direction he's going in,
right?
So what it means is that Israel has to brace itself, assuming that Biden becomes the president. Israel's going to have to brace itself for more of that kind of concession. So let me just ask you, in the for the next few minutes before we end, it sounds like this probably relates to the announcement, kind of strange timing for this announcement.
I know where you're going.
By the Palestinian Authority, right? The Palestinian Authority a couple of days ago was in the news. Mahmoud Abbas, who's 85 years old and is not very healthy, announced that they are willing, the Palestinian Authority, people should know this, I mean, every defender of Israel should know this, that the reason that there have not been negotiations ongoing for these last bunch of years between Israel and the Palestinian Authority is because the Palestinian Authority refuses to come to the negotiating table.
Right.
That's really this. I mean, there's an open invitation basically for them to come to the negotiating table, and they've refused to come. And they're saying that they're willing to start negotiations again. Now, when I say it's strange timing, on the face of it, the timing is strange because the Israeli government is in flux and is about to actually head into new elections, which is an odd time to be suggesting that you're going to be negotiating. The U.S. administration is also not sorted itself out yet. We don't even know who the players are going to be there. But so can we interpret that this announcement by the Palestinian Authority is trying to signal to the incoming Biden administration that they're on board?
Yes, absolutely. First of all, as you mentioned, Mahmoud Abbas, Abu Mazen, is not only old, but he's in the 14th year of his 4-year term. Democracy is a wonderful thing.
Yeah, well,
They
time
have,
doesn't matter. Yeah, but
yeah, time, yeah, 4, 14. They have absolutely categorically refused to sit and negotiate, which, by the way, in its own right, let me take a moment on this to clarify. We have everything they want. They have nothing that we want. We're willing to negotiate with them to give them a significant part of what they want. We have the power to hold what they want without negotiating, and they refuse to negotiate with us. What's wrong with this picture? And we have to give them incentives to come to the table so that we can give them what they want. Very, very strange.
it is.
So now they wake up one morning and say, we want to put pressure on Israel to come to negotiate. It's like, really? Now you wake up. So here's how I read it. They see a new administration coming in. They want to go get on record, on board, that they are more peace-loving than we are. Of course, they're still killing Jews, but let's not let that get in the way of a good peace operation. Dead Jews have never stopped anybody from making peace anywhere. And that plays very well into the thinking of the Dennis Ross school, which is, oh, look, they really want to make peace. They're really very good people. They're liberal Democrats. All we need to do is offer them a little bit more, and that'll close the deal. Maybe if we get the Israelis to evacuate some more settlements, stop military operations against terrorists, give Hamas some more money to build tunnels and fortifications in Gaza, not respond to rocket attacks. All of these are confidence-building measures that allow the Palestinians in that kind of thinking to come closer to being able to agree to a peace agreement with Israel. The only problem with it is that everybody in the Middle East basically understands that it's nonsense. The Emirates,
Yeah, Bahrain,
Sudan,
Oman,
Bahrain, Morocco, right? Everybody in the neighborhood says, you guys don't know what you're talking about. But never let realpolitik get in the way of good theory.
Now, okay, final question. Is it possible, based on what you've said about Dennis Ross, and in his book, he actually talks about how they misread Arafat. Is it possible that someone like that could have learned from his mistakes, and if he re-enters the arena, will actually handle things differently because he knows what didn't work last time? Is that possible?
Look, the great aspect of a question like that is that the answer has to be yes.
Yes, of course. Exactly. It's always possible. But
okay.
You understand the question I'm asking.
Right. So it is possible. And look, Ross is not stupid. Let me reframe your question in a way that allows it to be answered in one of two ways.
Okay.
Will he assess reality and understand that his ideological, theoretical base has been wrong in its predictive ability? Or will he say that my theoretical, ideological base has predictive ability, it has failed because of A, B, C, and D?
And therefore, I can run the same program, but I just have to tweak it.
Right. Okay. So you have the Einstein statement, which I fully support, that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Okay. But insane people don't see that they're doing the same thing over and over again. They always say, well, but things have changed since I did it the last time.
This
I
time it'll
can
work.
this time it'll work. Socialism, I'm not talking about Ross, I'm talking about others in the spectrum. Socialism can work this time.
Yeah. Okay. All right. This is going to be interesting. You know, it's also interesting when you talk about that the Palestinians don't have anything that we want. Just one final thought, which is that there was a time, if you go back, 25 years and and beyond, where they did have something very much that we wanted, which was that the amount of security problems and the amount of death on the Israeli side was so much that we wanted them to stop.
Right.
At this point, I have to say, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, as we're two people who live in Israel, that at this point, the the level of uprising, to whatever extent it exists, the level of danger to Israelis, to whatever extent it exists, for the last number of years, has not been to the point that it would incentivize Israel to make any significant concessions, and that's an important point. And I think that that's not only due to Israel's security efforts, but if I could be so bold, I think it's also due to the fact that much of the Palestinian population is changing. And if we separate the leadership of the Palestinian population and the population itself,
Mm-hmm.
the population itself is, it appears, much more than in the past, has grown tired of the whole thing.
Pesach, I think that the question of security up to and through Oslo up until today is worth a subject as a talk
All right.
in and of itself.
So we'll devote an episode to that. All right. Thank you, everyone. We've gone a little long this time. And again, to our Christian friends, Merry Christmas. It's just around the corner, a couple of days away. Although obviously, we're Jewish and we don't celebrate Christmas, although my wife enjoys around this season, because, we both grew up in North America. She enjoys watching movies that are like these Christmas comedies, just because, like the whole scene. So,
and we're going to make Chinese food just in honor of.
There you go. That's a Jewish tradition. All right. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time on Israel Matters. Please share this video. Please tell people about it. Everyone who watches this, other people who care about Israel. Please do that and help us spread the word. I know that we continue to get feedback from people saying that these are very helpful and very educational. They go much more in depth. This isn't the news. This is really what's really going on and understanding it in full context. So please share these videos and spread the word. Thank you very much. God bless.